So what I wanted to ask you is if you could explain a little bit more about these levels of cognition that you referred to, and specifically how you spoke about flow, but then you spoke about some higher levels, specifically how that relates to wisdom. So could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I've got to go sort of two dimensions that are related, sort of what we might call the intention dimension. Sorry, not the intention, the intelligence dimension and the consciousness dimension. But I'm using dimension because I want them to be seen as sort of two different dimensions of the same thing. So the argument that I've made, and that we human beings show, unlike ChatGPT-4, we show general intelligence, which is we seem to be able of solving a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains with sort of an equal competence. The problem with something like GPT-4 right now is it can score in the top 10th percentile for the Harvard Law exam, but if you ask it to, which one of my friends, fellow academics did, ask it to explain John Vervaeke's talk at the Concilians Conference, you'll get something that's sort of a middling C in grade 11 philosophy, right? And human beings would show a much more equivalent competency across those tests.
Right.
So you have this, and then the proposal that I've been arguing for with a whole bunch of other people, so many people, Tim Lillicrap, Blake Richards, Leo Ferraro, Gary Hovhannissian, Brad Anderson, Mark Mel, just a whole bunch of people that I've been working with around it, is that that general intelligence is this relevance realization predictive processing that I've been talking about.
Wait, forgive me for the interjection here. Can you explain from your point of view, what is the distinction between intelligence and rationality?
Oh, well, that's exactly what I was going to do.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so here's the thing. Your intelligence, I think, so there must be a general feature of intelligence behind your general intelligence. That's what I was laying out.
Okay.
And the proposal is the general feature would be a meta problem that needs to be solved for all individual problem solving. And then that meta problem is relevance realization predictive processing. And so the proposal is that general intelligence is your ability to, in an anticipatory, that's the predictive processing, in an anticipatory fashion, realize relevance. So you can measure intelligence both by the capacity to zero in on relevant information and also the scope that an organism can anticipate relevance realization. Is it right here, or can they do it further and further and further out?
Okay.
And so intelligence is that ability. And then here's the proposal. Intelligence, right, if it's relevance realization predictive processing, it always comes at the cost of proneness to self-deception. Let me give you an example. You're playing a game of chess. The problem space, all the possible combination of moves, is greater than the number of atomic particles in the universe. So what people do is they adopt strategies for ignoring a lot of information. In a way, again, that sounds like a Zen koan. What makes you intelligent is your capacity to ignore just a lot of information. So I'm playing chess with somebody, and they've adopted a framing in order to avoid the combinatorial explosion. It's called a heuristic of focusing in on the center board and trying to control the center board. It's a good way, because that's a way of excluding so much information that you're literally biasing your attention, right? But I noticed that they were doing that. And so I played a game against them that looked like I was caring about the center board, and actually I was building up a peripheral attack, and I won. Because
against the
opponent.
Yeah. Against a person, or against a person?
It was
against a person, okay.
Right. Notice that the very process that they're engaging in that is indispensable to making them intelligent, which is a process of framing and ignoring most of the information, also it's a bias that makes them prone to self-deception. They're actually mistaking which information is important, and that's really important, mistaking which information is important. Now let's take it up into an interpersonal example. Because you know when you have misframed things, when you get the opposite, when you have an insight. When you do the following, you say, I thought she was angry. Turns out she's actually afraid. And I have been misframing, misinterpreting this whole situation. And you go back and you have that aha moment and you re-alter what's salient and relevant and which aspects of her behavior you're paying attention to. You've had those insight moments, I assume, and we have them. You can have them interpersonally, you can have them intellectually. And that is a moment in which your capacities for relevance realization are reflected back such that you realize that your current framing is actually wrong, and you restructure, and that's insight. But this points to what I would say the primary definition of rationality is, which is not the Cartesian definition that rationality that the logos should be reduced to logic. Because the problem with that is, well, first of all, we can make machines that are very logical and they're not rational, is that does not capture what the ancients thought, I would argue, is the key to rationality, which is not logical consistency, but the existential and cognitive capacity to overcome self-deception. And that's a much more comprehensive thing, because you, of course, can use logic to also limit what you consider relevant and thereby make yourself vulnerable to self-deception in powerful ways. And so, for me, rationality is when you use intelligence, and here's where you start to move into a level. You use intelligence to learn how to best, right, overcome the self-deception that is generated by the use of your intelligence. So, intelligence is for problem solving. Rationality is to address the meta problem of self-deception that arises as you're trying to use your intelligence. And then, of course, and I won't go through the whole argument, you don't have, right, your intelligence is not just in one kind of knowing, it's in the propositional, the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory. So you need a rationality for each one of those. For example, the rationality of logic that I would use for managing propositional inference is not the rationality I would use for overcoming self-deception within attention. Then you need something like mindfulness practices, right? And so you want all of these rationalities, and then they in turn need to be properly ratioed, proportioned, right? Calibrated, set into appropriate checks and balances, so that you're not only self-correcting the errors within each knowing, you're also correcting the errors between the kinds of knowing, the self-deceptions. And so now you first had intelligence applied to the problem of using your intelligence. Now you have, and that's rationality, and now you have rationality applied to the problem of rationality. And so you get a rationally self-transcending rationality. And I ask you to, again, that I am not saying logic. Logic is one tool of that. I'm talking about this much more comprehensive notion of overcoming self-deception and having increasing insight into what is really going on. And so if you think of an individual that can come into a very complex, messy, dynamical situation in which things are very poorly defined, and they can zero in on the relevant information in this rationally self-transcending rationality, and they can fit themselves to it well, so they can intervene in it properly. That's my proposal as to what a wise individual would be. So they are, and then that has two directions to it. One is, and this is completely Plato, not me, right? One is that alignment of the different kinds of intelligences and rationalities. You can see this in the Republic. Cool. They have to be properly aligned, so you get the inner justice, and then that reduction in inner conflict reduces self-deception. So for example, right, the more urgent part of me will make what is superficial salient, and that's relevant for certain kinds of problems. That has to be put into balance with right? The cognitive level, Plato often calls it the rational level, that is dealing with much more long-term, broader scope, long-term goals, right? So again, it's this rationally self-transcending rationality, and that, for Plato, that gives you a kind of fullness of being, because the degree to which you reduce that inner conflict is the degree to which all of the parts can come to the overall maximal cooperative fullness of existence. So they all exist as much as they can without being at the detriment to the other parts. Yeah. So you have this inner fullness of being. So it's this inner fullness of being, but it's coupled to the fact that my self-deception is going down, so that I'm actually seeing more deeply into reality, because I'm seeing through illusion and into reality. Yeah. As I get better at that ontological depth perception, I of course can reflect that back and see more better into my psyche and afford that alignment even better. That alignment then improves my ability to see into reality. And so the two are going to do this. They're going, and this is the anagoge out of the cave, right? Right. This is right. The two, right? I see the beautiful, and I become more beautiful, so that I can see more beauty, so I can become right. This is the Platonic anagoge. Right. And for me, why that is a good account of wisdom is because what it does is couple together two meta drives that human beings have. So, in addition to whatever goal human beings pursue, they want the satisfaction of that goal to not bring about massive internal conflict. Mm-hmm. And this is cognitive dissonance theory, Fessinger, all this kind of human beings. This is a meta drive. They will make tremendous sacrifices. The other is, right, that human beings desire, that they have the meta desire that whatever is fulfilling their desire is real and as real as possible. So I will do the following with my students. And this comes up what we were talking about at dinner last night. I'll ask them, because the way our culture is making romantic relationships the summit of human fulfillment, which I'm very critical of. But I'll ask my students, how many of you are in really satisfying romantic relationships? And a certain number will put up your hands. I say, okay, of those people, how many of you would want to know that your partner was cheating on you, even if that meant the destruction of the relationship? 95% of the people put their hands back up. Namely, they don't want it if they know it's not real.
Which is amazing, because it shows how human beings, despite whatever philosophical or ideological commitments they might have to non-reality or to the direction of skepticism, when it actually comes down to their own real life, they want to affirm realism.
They do. Yes. They want these two things. Right? And to my mind, the genius of Plato's proposal of anagoge is if you train the psyche well, right, you can get these two things to reciprocally open each other. Yeah. And of course, reciprocal opening is the cognitive statement of love. Love is the effective realization of reciprocal opening. And this, of course, is again a Platonic point. You get the greatest rationality and the greatest love being interwoven in this reciprocal opening that brings people a fulfillment, I think. And so wisdom is that proposal. The intelligent, but you can see the levels. You got intelligence, that's one level. Mm-hmm. Then you get the recursion on rationality, and then you get the recursion on wisdom, and then the wisdom, to be fully wisdom, has to be put into the anagogic ascent.
So I guess a number of questions arise in my mind. I don't know where that took you. It took me in several directions. I guess one direction is how you would relate that to, I'd say, classical accounts either of mystical experiences, transcendent experiences, or of what people sometimes call enlightenment. Or maybe perhaps in the Orthodox Church we use a broadly correspondent term, which is illumination, which is not quite the same thing as enlightenment, but there is obviously some parallels. People understand, the general understanding of enlightenment is one of a, let's say, it's a constant state, in which this sense of, let's say, at oneness or the sense of connectedness, and the proper relationship between the oneself and the elements of that which is at one becomes salient, so that one acts in the appropriate manner at the relevant times, such that those who would observe that person would describe that as wisdom.
Yes.
That is a wise person.
Yes, which I think resonates with everything I just said. But the way to fully answer your question is, so I went down the road of intelligence. I want to now go over to consciousness, and there's a similar thing, which is the idea of insight as that moment where the relevance realization machinery recurses back on itself, and it opens up your consciousness of the situation. Now, again, I have to talk about these as if they're separate, but I keep wanting to say they're two dimensions of the same thing. And then the idea, which we've already talked about, is I can chain a bunch of insights together, and I get something greater than the sum of the part, and I get the flow state.
Or, well, hopefully more than the flow state.
Yes, but just, well, I'm just going to try and put benchmarks on the continuum. And then the next is the proposal. Well, I don't want to do the video game flow state. I don't want to just flow here. I want to get a flow that transfers as broadly and deeply as I possibly can.
In real life.
In real life. And Stephen Batchelor, in his book on Buddhism, Alone with Others, when he talks about, he proposes that the Buddha's enlightenment was exactly that kind of comprehensive and continuous flow state. That's actually how. So that says at least we're on a trajectory that
and I would note, as an aside, that in the Orthodox tradition we would understand what the fathers describe as the state of illumination, as apart from other things, a continuous flow state.
That makes me happy, because a scientist is happy if their theories generalize well, right? It probably makes you happy for different reasons, but at least we're happy together. And then the idea I've proposed in the work I've done on mystical experiences, and especially higher states of consciousness, makes the proposal that we're getting a flow state in something that is is presupposed by all of our individual interactions. So the idea here is the notion of orientation from Stegmaier, the philosophy of orientation. And so when I'm interacting with things, the notion from Merleau-Ponty, that relevance realization is always getting me in, and this isn't static, this is fluid, but the terms will make it sound static, but it's not. I'm always getting an optimal grip. Because of all these, I get more detail here, but I lose the gestalt. I get the gestalt, and remember I talked about the inevitable trade-offs? And what you want to do is, in this situation, where is the best place I should be in that trade-off for the task? And if I'm painting the cup, it's a different optimal grip from where I want to drink from the cup.
And forgive me this interjection, but this is almost exactly what Aristotle describes as phronesis.
Yes. I made that proposal.
And Aristotle defines phronesis as orthos logos ton praktikon. So the correct logos, the correct reason of practical things.
Yes.
Which is, let's say, lower than wisdom.
Yes.
Perhaps sometimes when the ancients talk about the four general virtues, sometimes they use phronesis in there, which is translated as prudence, whether that's right or not.
Yes.
And sometimes they use Sophia. Right. But this optimization that you're referring to, that is really the orthos logos.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
So if my understanding of this is you are describing, at least to a great extent, what the ancients would refer to as this orthos logos.
I think that's right. We could perhaps come back to it. I think I support the argument that Aristotle's notion of wisdom is ultimately the interpenetrative relationship, top down, bottom up, of Phronesis and Sophia.
Oh.
And there are other.
Well, because
Sophia should inform Phronesis.
Well, I mean, he understands it to at least to a great degree as the understanding of causes.
Yes.
What are the principles behind things? What are the causes of things? And of course, he's going to understand that in his theory of the four causes,
yes.
which of course is going to approach anything from multiple angles.
And the many kinds of knowing, I would put it.
And the many kinds of knowing, because those many kinds of knowing are immediately related to, those four causes. And so wisdom is, if we understand according to the ancient sense, wisdom as the understanding of causes or of principles being logos, then I think this expresses in a different way, but comes back to what you're saying insofar as we have, as orthos logos, we have a reciprocal relationship of these elements and perspectives on being, which let's say mutually both afford, correct, and potentiate each other.
Yes.
And
that's well said.
And
I like that.
Which together form the classical notion of wisdom, which implicitly at least strongly contains the idea of avoiding self-deception.
Yes.
Because if you are practicing that form of wisdom, or engaging or expressing that form of wisdom in the correct way, naturally it is a system, so to speak, which avoids self-deception.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. So insight, flow state, right? Mm-hmm. And then we can think about, so we're optimal gripping, but that's this problem. And then there's an optimal grip for that problem. So I want to use an analogy. I'm a martial artist, right? If you'll permit me, there are literally optimal grips on your opponent, right? Okay. Right? But before you get into any fight or sparring, you take what's called a stance. Now, the stance is not a way of gripping your opponent. You never use the stance. The stance is a way of meta-optimal gripping. What I mean by that is, here's a whole repertoire of ways I need to grip my opponent, or ways I need to fight off my opponent gripping me. And this particular position gives me the best access to all of this network. Mm-hmm. If I take another stance, I'll privilege these and I'll be too distant from those. Mm-hmm. But this is the optimal grip on the optimal grips. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
So what I propose is going on in a branch of mystical experiences, because mystical experience is a very broad category. Right. And I want to concentrate on the ones that have what are called higher states of consciousness, and these demonstrate what is called ontonormativity. Okay, so please hold in mind what I was saying, because I then want to. Ontonormativity is, okay, so most of the time the way we determine how real something is how well it fits into our common everyday experience. So you have a dream, you say that's not real because it doesn't fit in coherently with all of this, unless I categorize it as a dream. I was drunk and blah, blah, but that doesn't fit in because, right? Now what's odd about these experiences, these higher states of consciousness, is people have these often singular experience, and they'll say, it doesn't fit into this. And they do the opposite. That was more real than this. Ontonormativity. It's more real and it's normative because they reorganize, Etna has shown this, they reorganize their lives so that they can come into more continual conformity with that greater reality.
And this is a universal phenomenon.
Yes, yes. So part of what I've been trying to explain is what's going on in the ontonormativity, and the idea that I've proposed, and I can't make the argument in full, but we've said a lot about flow, and think about what if people were in a state in which they were in the flow state, but at the level of orientation, at the level of meta-optimal gripping. They're not flowing in this situation. or that situation, but they have they're flowing at the level of their orientation and stance on reality as a whole. Does
that makes perfect sense.
Right, and that would give you a tremendous sense of ontonormativity, because you're getting the orientation that is affording sort of anagoge in a profound way. And so I think that's what's going on in higher states of consciousness. So, but now, here was the wisdom track down here, of intelligence, and then there's this higher state of consciousness, right? And I don't know what to use. I sometimes use the word gnosis, but I don't mean anything Gnostic. I mean what the word gnosis originally meant.
Well, the fathers of the church often use the word gnosis.
Okay, so let's say we have...
Which is different from the other word episteme, which is knowledge in terms of science.
Yes, exactly.
Spiritual knowledge.
Yes, yes. So I will, and you encouraged me into this to some degree, because of the idea of like, this is more at the level of the nous. What I'm talking about here, okay?
Right.
So let's say we have gnosis, as we're understanding it here, and wisdom here, so that we have wise gnosis, and no, I'm not going to say Gnostic, I'm going to say gnosis, right? Empowerment of wisdom, so that the consciousness and the intelligence are mutually affording each other and enhancing each other. So that is also now self-transcending. That is how I understand enlightenment. Because I try to reverse engineer enlightenment, and it won't completely converge with you, but I'm just giving you my argument. For me, enlightenment is that state that reliably affords the overcoming of the perennial problems of self-deception, alienation, anxiety, and absurdity. And that state that I've just described gives you the most empowered state for being able to reliably and comprehensively address the perennial problems that threaten meaning and drive self-deception. So that's what I regard enlightenment to be.
Well, thank you for that explanation. That was fantastic. It's hard to argue with anything you said. Obviously what you just described is not exactly the way that we as Orthodox Christians would understand, let's call them transcendent states.
Yes.
And it's not really because we would disagree with any particular thing that you said, or even the whole scheme of what you said. It would be more. Maybe you can just say what you think about this. I would say it would be more like to go into what would truly be the highest forms. We need some help.
Yes, and this overlaps with our discussion
and
yesterday.
We see our inadequacy, our sense of loss, and
it's like you.
Finitude.
We can we see our own inadequacy, and there's an aspiration. You just described something that was that I would want everybody to aspire to, actually. That is a beautiful vision of how we can develop ourselves, and on multiple levels, which would include both our relationship with other people, our relationship with ourselves, and with getting into a deeper relationship with being or reality, and hopefully pointing towards something that is at either the bottom or the top of it.
Yeah, and I acknowledge this.
Right.
Right.
I guess for one idea that we often emphasize in Christianity, although it exists in one form or another, actually, in just about every religion, is this idea of the human inadequacy, of our own weakness, our own failings, which we all feel within ourselves. This sense that, except for the person who's completely delusional and thinks that he's invincible.
Right. Yes.
Which maybe was some of us when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
And then we learned that was a delusion. The sense that we see that there's this something higher. We can see even maybe part of the path towards what it is, we can strive towards it and gain perhaps a great deal of it, and yet there's something lacking, and yet we need some help in order for us to be able to do it. And of course, this is where, as Christians, we understand well, a number of specifically religious ideas come in. You know, first of all, the idea of prayer, prayer in the sense of asking God for help, and then the idea of grace, of being the, how you say, the action of God,
the gifted action.
Yeah, literally, that's what it means. It means it means gift. You know, you could, how you say, depending on the imagery you want to use, you know, coming down to us or being within us. Of course, we believe that the grace is present within us, and that, you know, the actually Saint Gregory Palamas, for example, he talks about how the way to go to access this, I don't want to make it sound mechanical.
No.
You know, is by entering into the nous, and through the purification of the soul. But however you want to phrase it or conceive of it, there's you know, there's an element of the divine or the ultimate reaching down to us.
Yeah, and first of all, let me address that because I do think that there are vertical affordances as well as horizontal affordances, and the way the affordance is co-made. That I do think this project I'm talking about is participation within a synergy or a synergistic participation. That right, and the verse from the Psalms where deep is calling to deep has always sort of been the thing in my mind that I use to understand that. That there's not only something that in me that is calling, right, but I'm also being called. Yeah. Yaden has also got a very good book out called The Sense of Being Called, and an investigation of what does that mean in people and how does it show up in people. So this is also something that we're investigating. So for me, and Tanabe, within Japanese philosophy is metanoetics. You should like the title. Right. He talks about Jiriki and Tariki. There's self-power and there's other power, and by other power he means divine or sacred, and that they have to be properly coordinated. Although other power has ultimately more causal efficacy in the synergistic relationship. Yeah. And I think, I mean, to be consistent with the notion of affordance and the existence of the vertical and levels, I think I agree with this. In fact, I've already agreed with this with Jonathan Pajot's notion that he argues that faith is the sense of a higher level gestalt that only makes sense after you've been drawn up to the higher level, and then it makes sense. But you can't infer or project your way into it. You have to be drawn up into it. But once you do, you get a retrospective understanding. And so what I want to say to you, and I say it in friendship, is I experience that in my life and in my practice. I experience that upward call. I experience the other, something other than myself at work in this. And like I say, I think not only is it phenomenological, I think I'm obligated by my arguments to acknowledge this, but the fact that the phenomenology and the arguments come together means that I say a very strong yes to what you're saying. So I do think, yes, but I do think that I do think Plato was also trying to point to that, and it definitely comes out in the Neoplatonists after Iamblichus, right? But the idea that
it's everywhere. I'm not saying that this is. It's maybe in some way strongest in Christianity.
Yeah.
But it's it's in every religion in one form or another.
And I
believe.
I think the reasons I've given, it has to be.
It has to be.
Right?
It has to be.
And then it shows up, and so if, yes, on that continuum, the wise gnosis, and it's giving you the reciprocal opening. I think the reciprocal opening doesn't just open this way, it also opens this way.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned faith in there, because of course, obviously for Christians, faith is is a tremendously central idea, and I think that apart from relating faith to this specific question, we would also relate faith in the broader way of, if we go back to the original thing that we were talking about, what are the presuppositions of the scientific method? Well, those presuppositions, we're accepting them on a kind of faith.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, that you can't actually prove them rationally.
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing you could do because any rational proof presupposes them, yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And so what we're left with is that something about reality, or rather, there is something which precedes rationality.
Yes.
And that something that precedes rationality is only accessible to us by some kind of faith.
Right. I want to try and really sharpen this.
Sharpen it, please. Yes.
Because of course there's two ways in which when people hear that word, and ways in which I reject those ways, and I want to open up by contrast what I think we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
One is believing without evidence, just as some incredulous thing,
Right.
or one is a pretension to certainty, which I find very problematic. And to be fair to me, this was the interpretation of faith that I was basically being taught at one point in my life. Now, I hear you saying, the thing about the presuppositions is, yes, you can't prove them, but they're not just asserted. You trust them within enacting them. Right?
Well, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you allow the extension, this is the way that we as Christians understand our religious faith,
Yes.
as precisely as enacted and therefore experienced.
Yes, yes.
So now, of course, I recognize that there's a kind of jump.
Yeah.
Well, Kierkegaard would say the leap.
Yeah. It's actually the leap into faith, by the way, not the leap of faith. And that makes much more sense given what we're talking about now.
Yes.
So,
It does.
well, I mean, we can say, all right, there's belief, right? Belief, assent to a proposition.
Yeah.
Okay, but even at the basic level that we're talking about, the presuppositions of the scientific method, it has to be more than just belief, because the reason that we, let's say, assent to it is not because we perceive that as a proposition it has some logical arguments behind it. We assent to it because we are experiencing it.
Yeah,
That is our life.
So let me then strengthen that, given I think we're saying the same thing. I have a lot of argumentation that relevance realization is presupposed by representation, it's presupposed by inference, it's presupposed by any proof, argument, theory you want to make. So relevance realization is preconceptual, it's pre-categorical, it's pre-inferential. And in that sense, it's not generated from inference, it's not generated by conceptualization, it's not generated by categorization. And if you want, I could give you arguments for each one of those claims. But right. And so, but nevertheless, you trust it because you cannot help but enact it in order to try and in order to try and use representations, make concepts, categorize, right? And so what you find is, but it's also not a dead, static thing. It's a thing in which you participate in its shaping. So if you, right, and I think, and it's also the thing that makes the leap, like an insight. You're inside a frame and you leap outside, right? Or you're in this level and you leap to the higher level, like Jonathan is talking about. Like when I was talking about earlier, you go from the letters to the word, but you're using the word to disambiguate the letters. So all of this, this is how I understand faith, I understand it as you are participating in something and you trust it, because in enacting it, it is actually shaping itself so that the capacities of inference, categorization, representation, theorization are available to you. And so you would get involved in a profound performative contradiction to try and deny that. And the reason why, this may sound like I'm splitting hairs, but I'm trying to move the notion of presupposition off a propositional assumption and into this deeper enacted engagement with reality.
Well, I agree with that part very, very strongly, which is also incidentally why I think it has it is an ethical move.
Yes.
You know, it's an ethical decision, as it were, in itself, and it's within an ethical framework. But
could we perhaps say normative framework? Because I want to include the true, the good, the true and the beautiful, as well as the good, in a much more comprehensive.
Well, how can you say that? I agree with that.
Okay.
It's just the reason I'm not using the word normative is because it's less accessible to a lot of people.
Oh, okay. But if we just, if
I agree with it.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
Okay.
But if, with faith, you say I would express it a little bit differently from the way that you just described it.
Please.
Well, I would refer to St. Paul in the Hebrews that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So when we have faith, that which is not susceptible of logical proof or demonstration, but which can be experienced, becomes real and present to us. And that, how you can say, that happens in an immediate sense that no person can deny by the simple fact of our existence here in this world. I would say, and actually some of the fathers of the church explicitly argue this, that I can say that is the first step of faith, and that sets up this dynamic between faith, pistis, and gnosis. So there's this mutual affirming between pistis and gnosis, between faith and knowledge as gnosis. Because
are you saying the word that I pronounce as gnosis?
Yeah.
Okay.
In Greek it's pronounced gnosis.
Right. Yeah.
Gnosis.
There's no phoneme like that in English. So
I know. But that's it's the same word.
Okay.
Same word, same idea.
Okay.
So then, for us as Christians, if we are looking at reality in the way that you're describing, and which is essentially the what was commonly accepted in one form or another by most people in the pre-modern world, that if we're looking to experience the fullness of, not only the fullness of reality, the fullness of being, but even more so that which is the source or the grounding or origin, however you want to express it, the ground of being, that it is a sensible and eminently reasonable move to make, to accept that which is not immediately accessible to us simply by the act of existing, but which can become immediately accessible to us through that advancement in virtue and wisdom, and as you would call higher states of consciousness or so. It is a logical, or let's say it is a reasonable move for us to make that move of faith, almost you could say preemptively, before one has actually experienced all of those possible states. But those states being, how you can say, both reasonable to posit, and also well testified by you know, many people throughout all times and places.
Yes.
That therefore it is reasonable for us to make that leap into faith that is a different, that is the I can say a second level, a second.
I get it. I hadn't thought about that before. So let me make sure I understand you.
And forgive me for what that does is that having made that move, that leap into faith, to use Kierkegaard, he always kind of like inserts himself into things. What that does is then that affords us the possibility of access and presence of all of those higher levels of which we've spoken about, and depending on the, I can say, the level of our faith, or you could say the intensity, we would say the fervor, you know, that these can become even more present. Although we as Orthodox Christians would never make the move that some Protestants make of divorcing it from all of the other elements of virtue.
You don't make a justification, sanctification distinction.
No. We would see this as not indistinguishable. They're certainly distinguishable, but necessarily moving together, syndrechondes, as it says in the Council of Chalcedon, concurring with the virtues, or as the Fathers say, with the purification of the soul, which then makes present to us that which is transcendent.
So let me say what I think I'm hearing, but I'll use my language and see if it lands back and see if we're getting a rhythm going. So I heard you acknowledge that there's this sort of primordial aspect of faith, which I was talking about in sort of relevance realization, and then there's a higher order. I think you said next level or something along those lines. Okay. And so, and what I heard you saying is two things, both of which I agree with, and both of which I think follow from the arguments I've been making. That, and this is again a radical distinction from Descartes, who proposes a universal method, and then Leibniz proposes a universal calculus. And this is the pre-Cartesian notion that the certain truths are only disclosed after one goes through transformation or transcendence. They're undisclosable to you within at a certain level, if we could put it that way.
But they're not propositional truths.
Pardon me?
These are not propositional truths.
No, exactly. That's what I mean. That's yes, very much. So let's put the two together. So we've got this primordial religio, relevance realization, and then there are ways in which our ability, maybe you'll allow me that term before that anagogic ontological depth perception, seeing more deeply into the psyche, seeing more deeply into reality, that is only possible if you're willing to go through a transformation. Those truths are, but that what we can do is we can be afforded an aspirational, orientation towards that by trusting in what's emerging in our experience, but also the testimony of other people. And I'm relying on the testimony of other people when I talk about higher states of consciousness, right? And that once a person makes that commitment in orientation, then there's also a responsiveness from reality, and I hear you saying ultimately the ground of being itself that matches and starts to draw you up, and that's what your understanding is faith. Is that working?
Yes, maybe I would express it just a little bit more, a little bit stronger, and that I can say the response, we would say is not simply matching. It's more than matching.
Yes, I don't have any problem with that.
Okay.
That's.
I didn't mean to quibble there.
No. I didn't want to make it sound like In fact, given the argument we're making, it couldn't be matching because we're trying to talk about something vertical and not just something horizontal.
Right. But see,
that's a notion of faith that I'll use your word, although I find the word problematic given current culture, but it is something that I experience, and probably not to the degree or the specificity that you're talking about, but I do experience something beyond just that primordial connectedness. I do experience the drawing upward. And the drawing into.
Right. Well. I mean, of course, I'm very happy to hear that. Obviously, we do make it more specific.
Yes.
And we don't have to get into the reasons for the specificity right now. The reasons do exist.
Yes.
But I don't want to get into polemics, which is a little bit where that would lead, because obviously a question that might arise in your mind or somebody else's mind is well, why this faith rather than that faith?
Well, that's the problem of pluralism. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But like I say, but just let's suppose keeping it on a more general level, but nevertheless, as we Christians understand it and experience it, that the faith, how can you say, it's there is power there.
Yes.
There is real power.
Yeah.
And that opens us up for the real experience of the divine, made immediately present, so that those things which we could, let's say, postulate as being further above us, further in, further out, further up, that those things, that this affords us the possibility of being open to them, and hence makes them present.
I'm not reducing it to this. I'm asking if it's a dimension of what you're talking about. Is this something like, faith is also something like a cultivated receptivity that allows you to receive more? So I'm trying to distinguish between you grasping or making or projecting into something, but you're doing something.
You're opening yourself up. I mean, you're not, how can you say, again, we avoid the mechanical.
Yes.
There's which is part of my argument against theurgy, but we
that's why I used the word cultivate. I was trying to use something that was much more less mechanical and more sort of had more of an organic association.
Well, I would say that we can cultivate faith.
Yes.
I mean, there is how can you say, people. I think we have to be a little careful with the way we express this, because people can get confused. There is a kind of decision that is made in accepting faith. In other words, faith is not simply something that happens to you from the outside without any participation from you, for any consciously. However, you can't. The human psyche is not capable of choosing to believe just anything.
No, belief is not an action.
Right. So I mean, I cannot make myself believe that the world rests on the back of a turtle.
Yes.
Okay. No matter what you told me, no matter you can threaten me with eternal hellfire and everything. If I don't believe that, there is no way that I can make that. I can believe that.
Yeah.
I could pronounce the words.
Yes, you can imagine it, you can picture it. Yes,
right. Yeah. But I cannot believe that, and that is because it is an idea which is contradicted by all of the other experiences that I have of reality and my place in it. So I can say the same thing applies, on a less ridiculous level, to people having religious faith. In other words, that for a person to have religious faith,
It's a decision, but it's not a choice.
It's not, right.
Yes,
There has to be a set of preconditions which surround the person in order for that to be a viable option to them.
That overlaps with what we were talking about yesterday when I was talking about you gather the conditions together, but you can't make the spark catch.
Mhm.
Right. Yes.
Right.
So this sense of faith, and I mean both the meaning sense of sense and the sense of sense. It sounds a lot it sounds like it overlaps this part with love a lot. I mean, there's a decision in loving somebody, but it's not a choice in the sense of now I love you, right? Right.
I mean, you how can you say you could resist it.
You can resist it.
You can make a conscious choice. Like, I'm attracted to somebody. There are all sorts of reasons why I would want to become close to that person, but I make a conscious choice of no.
Yes. But you don't.
Or you can make a conscious choice of I'm going to pursue that.
But that conscious choice is only a choice. Yeah, that's why I'm even trying to resist the word choice. But it's let's use decision. It's a decision to enter into something that you only are participating in. It is not something you are orchestrating.
Which is only afforded to you under certain circumstances.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen. It's not like every woman that you meet is a possibility to fall in love with.
Right, and it's the same thing with friendship. You can't go to somebody and say, "Now you're my friend." Right.
Right. But if you sense that there's the possibility of friendship there, you can choose to pursue that, or you can choose to withdraw from it.
Yes. I think I agree with that.
So for us with faith, there's the choice that's like that. In other words, you would say constricted, I suppose.
Yeah.
In connection with what we were talking about before, and sometimes perhaps often there is something from above that comes down. That's sometimes referred in formal theological language as prevenient grace.
Prevenient, right.
For us as Christians, what that does, what faith does, is allows us a richer worldview,
does it afford you falling in love with with a deeper reality?
Well, yes, and because it then implies other things. It implies a trust in the providence of God.
Yes.
So is a better word. I'm not saying the word faith is bad, but given that it has all these other associations in the culture, is a word like faithfulness a better word? I'm trying to get.
I don't think that's a better word.
I think about the way I'm thinking about it is the way I've chosen, but I haven't arbitrarily mandated or architected to be faithful to my partner, and that doesn't mean I'm claiming to have a cognitive grasp or a control over her behavior, but that I'm committed to this reciprocal opening with her.
Right, and if you did not have that commitment, you wouldn't have a relationship.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to use the word faithfulness because I'm trying to invoke a connectedness to falling in love, and I don't mean just romantic love. I mean any kind of falling. That's what I'm trying to do. That's why I'm trying to pick that term, because for me it resonates with being in love with someone.
Well, I think most Christians would understand love as being a deepening of faith.
I see.
I mean, this is why they're always connected, in faith, hope, and love.
Right.
The greatest of these is love, and so as a person deepens in their faith, it's going to be, if it's genuine, it's going to be a deepening of love, and it's going to be a deepening of love of God and of one's neighbor, and actually a love of all reality. Saint Isaac the Syrian, Saint Isaac the Syrian, he talks about it. He says, even loving the reptiles.
Yeah.
Even loving the demons.
Yeah.
Or feel pitiful, feel compassion for them.
Yeah. And so there's how can you say it affords us the possibility of falling in love with everything.
For me, that is kind of a culminating statement of what wisdom is. It It is the meta virtue that is cultivated in relationship to being, or the ground of being. I'm happy with that too, such that one becomes increasingly capable of falling deeper and deeper in love with the ground of being.
Amen to that.
Thank you so much for watching the panel discussion series with Dr. John Vervaeke, Bishop Maximus of Pelagonia, and Archimandrite Patapios. I'd like to take a moment to thank the seminary's donors and benefactors that have made this event possible. If you like this series, you can support the seminary in creating more content like this by making a gift at spots.edu. I do invite you to take a moment and fill out the short survey. This will really help the seminary's media efforts, and please let us know who you think should be our next special guest. Thank you.